Hi, this is Donna. Today we're going to be making another one sheet project. This, as you can see, is a kite shaped box, and this can be made from one sheet of A4 or US letter cardstock. You will need to think about how you're cutting the paper. This box is 1 inch deep. Of course, you can change the depth to make it as tall or as narrow as you need. The box does sit 4 inches across at the widest point, and it is approximately 5 3/4 from top to bottom. You do have the option of having the lid so that the tabs slot onto the inside like so, but it does look just as good if you have the lid so it slots down over the outside. The box is not too tricky to put together. There are some elements that you need to think about as you go along the process, such as adding the pattern paper and any closure mechanism, but I will point those out in the video. So without further ado, let's put the project together. We'll start by making the base of the box, which we will then add the sides onto. The base of the box is 5.5 by 4. We'll start on the short side and we're going to make a pencil mark at 2 inches. Rotate 90 degrees and make a pencil mark at 1 3/4 inches. Rotate 90 degrees and mark at 2. Rotate 90 degrees and mark at 3 3/4. So there'll be 4 pencil marks which will be opposite each other. I'll give you the measurements for the additional pieces as well. There'll be one side piece which is 1.5 times 9. Along the 1.5 inch side, score at 1. And on the long side, score at 4 1/4 and 8.5. There'll be a second side piece which will be 1.5 times 5 3/4. On the 1.5 inch side, score at 1, and on the long side, score at 2 5/8 and 5 1/4. For the lid of the box, you'll need a piece which is 6.5 by 5. On all 4 sides, score at 1/2 inch. On the short side, score down to the 1/2 inch score line at 2.5 inches. Rotate 90 degrees and score down to the 1/2 inch score line at 2 1/4 inches. Rotate 90 degrees, score at 2.5 inches. Rotate 90 degrees and score at 4 1/4 inches. Marks within the 1/2 inch score line which are opposite each other. We'll start with the base piece, and quite simply we're going to cut between the pencil lines to get our base kite shape. So use whichever is your preferred cutting method. I'm going to use my guillotine. Get rid of any pencil marks, and once you've done your cutting, just check the length of your sides. So the length of the short side should be 2 5/8 of an inch. That's okay, and the length of the long sides is 4 1/4. So if you need to do any adjustment, do that now before you go to add the sides on. We'll take the 2 side pieces, fold and burnish along all of the score lines, and just make sure that as you're burnishing, your piece is remaining parallel. We don't want any score lines going off at an angle. We'll treat both side pieces exactly the same. So this is the 1/2 inch tab on the right hand side. Remove the bottom right hand intersecting square, and all we're going to do is just create glue tabs within the 1/2 inch section. So we will take a wedge from the end of there, cut up this central score line and take a wedge from the ends of each of these. And of course you can change the height of the box or the depth of the box by changing the width of this piece to whatever you need plus a 1/2 inch glue tab. We'll do the same on the smaller piece. And then we're going to add the strips into or onto the base element. Now, you may decide that you'll find it easier to add the 2 strips independently and join them inside the box, or you might want to create one long strip and then add that into place. I'm going to join my 2 strips together. Okay, make sure that these are sitting, you want your score lines lined up, and if you fold them over, just check that the tops are lined up as well and that the piece is running parallel. So before you stick it in place, sit the 2 longer pieces on the base element, and you just want to check that you've cut the angles within these tabs acute enough so that the tabs can overlap one another and one is not interfering with another and stopping the piece moving around the shape of the box. So just sit it on, offer it up against the shape before we do any gluing, and just make sure that your glue tabs are going to sit nicely within the base. I'm going to use my construction glue because it will give me a little bit of wiggle room, and I'm going to add glue all the way along. I can join the ends up, and then because I've got the wiggle room, take my time to position, hold the end in place, and then position the sides onto the base element. So that has fitted quite nicely onto the base of the box. And now I can just go in, push down on the glue tabs in the base of the box. We'll now continue our work on the lid piece. We're going to start by adding our additional score lines, and we're going to score from the end of this score line across to the end of this score line, end of this score line to the end of this score line, and do that all the way around. So we're recreating the kite shape within this central panel, and the score lines can run right the way to the edge of the cardstock. Now, before we move any further, you need to think about your patterned paper on the top of the lid. There will be a score line which runs from this point here to this point here. The 2 tabs at this end will be adhered, and then this bottom half will be loose, so this is how you will access the box. And you can have the box so that the tabs sit on the outside or on the inside. So to start with, consider whether the top of your lid, the pattern paper, is going to be one whole piece, or whether you're going to have 2 triangles which sit either side of the score line. So that's the first thing to consider. So I'm going to have my pattern paper so that it fits across the whole of the top of the lid. So in order to do that, I'm going to replicate the base piece, which was cut from a piece of 5.5 by 4. So I'm going to do that again. And then once I've got my kite shape, which will be exactly the same size as this panel in the middle, I'm going to trim 1/8 of an inch off of all 4 sides. So that has given me this piece, which is going to sit in the middle like so. But before I adhere that into place, I want to have a string which is going to come from underneath this pattern paper, which I'm then going to add my bows on and use that as part of my closure. So before I stick my pattern paper on top, I'm going to add a length of ribbon which is going to be longer than I need, but I'm going to adhere it from about an inch and a half beyond the pattern paper. And now I'm going to stick my pattern paper over the top. I'm going to let that dry completely before I do anything else. Once your paper is adhered, put the piece back in your scoreboard and rescore at 2 1/4 inches right the way through the cardstock. So now we'll fold and burnish, and we're going to start by folding along the diagonal lines to form the kite shape. Next, you want to take your trimmer or your guillotine, and I'm going to trim 1/2 inch away from the score line that we've just burnished. So line the score line up with your 1/2 inch track on your trimmer or your guillotine. We're going to start to create our tabs. Do that on all 4 sides. Make sure you don't cut your ribbon if you've added it on. Have the piece in this direction, and I'm going to cut along what was the 1/2 inch score line. So it should run along the top edge of the point of the kite straight through to the other side. Rotate 180 degrees and do the same at the other end. Turn the piece around, and now I'm going to do exactly the same thing on this side. Now, certainly for this top section, you want to follow the 1/2 inch score line. In terms of this side section, you might want to shape that differently depending on whether you're going to have this side tab on the outside of the box or the inside. I'm going to have mine on the inside, so I'm going to cut right the way down the 1/2 inch score line. Rotate and do the same on this side. So take your base piece. Just make sure that your base piece is going to fit inside, because you may then decide, as long as your top section's fitting in nicely, you might find it easier to have your tabs on the outside of the box. So I can see that that is going to fit in there snugly. Before you glue your piece in, just fold and burnish along the 2 1/4 inch. You want the lid to be able to move freely, so just burnish that into place. And then you can add glue onto your glue tabs, and then sit your shorter end into the end on the inside of the box. So I'm going to sit that and slot that into place, so that sits in there nicely. I'm going to just push down against the glued side. I can push against this and burnish this side. So we'll let that dry completely. We want to make sure that those 2 sections at the back are completely dry before we start lifting the front section up. So whilst that's drying, I will add on the additional side pieces. My side pieces will be 3/4 inch times 2 3/8 for these short sections, and they will be 4 inches by 3/4 inch for the long sections. The box is now dry. I've added all of my additional pattern paper pieces on. I added a ribbon element across the front. The lid lifts up like so. And as I said at the beginning, you could have the tabs so they're on the outside if that you felt that gave you a better fit for the lid on the box. So it looks good either way. So there we have another 1 sheet project. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.